Oh, okay. Is it coming?
He said he was going to come.
Okay.
The email chain.
Oh, was he on there? Did he?
But I saw
Okay.
him.
Hey, Bob, question for you. This rental affidavit of compliance,
Yes,
Rebecca just told me that goes to the fire department?
it does.
So you have your own database.
Yes.
Her database is,
We can't use that.
we can't use this one?
No, we can't use her.
Well, sure we can use it. Why can't we use it?
The
Not-
legislation doesn't allow us to use that for anything other than occupancy tax.
Even the one she's created.
You're asking for money.
But this is about occupancy.
Well, you can take a look at what Lone Rock considered
Okay, that's on
their
there.
licensing.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about. That's what I think.
Their suggestion was to license each one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that would
Exactly. That's what we're, yeah.
The legislation for TDA, not TDA, but the occupancy tax, doesn't allow us to use that database for any other use.
I'll have to read that again. You're saying in the enabling legislation or in the?
Because I never had this.
Ford sent me a
Okay,
email.
all right. Well, I mean, we're going to have to create a database.
Correct.
I mean, that seems to be, without a database,
We can't do
we
it.
can't do anything.
I'm gonna have a hard time letting you know about the verification.
Exactly, we were just talking, that's exactly the,
So,
okay, all right. So we could use your database.
Good, how are you?
Yeah. Okay,
but there's very little compliance
yeah, that's kind of what I figured.
on this.
Yeah.
But yes, I have that data.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we just need to create a
Ours said
database first. We got to figure out how to get a
Good
database.
here, so.
Yeah, and it's gonna,
Okay, all right.
Lone Rock's solution was licensing.
And that, I think that's going to be the,
And, Asheville does it a little bit differently, but without a list of who they are.
If he came the same way I did, he'd probably hit that same hole.
I did find the rest of the,
Because I think you live
I think
on
I found the rest of
Sawmill.
the resolutions. I think we're legal on the 6%.
Did you get,
That's what I heard. That's what
no, I'm just saying, like, you don't know
I
that
haven't
the
actually
road's
seen the
closed until
language
you
yet,
get
but I'm
to
pretty
it.
sure. I mean, based on.
So you have to turn all the way around
Sandy gave a list to.
to drive here.
Yeah, there was like 3 or 4 more that we needed. I think that's the scope
As
of,
long as we've got legislation that goes from 3 to 6.
oh, we definitely, Gabe, we got a quorum. Give him 5 more minutes, 2 more minutes?
We could start whenever you want, or wait.
Well, we'll give him 2 more minutes.
Okay.
We're online already, right?
Yes,
Okay.
you are.
Okay, that's fine. No problem.
Carson, thank you for those maps.
Okay, good, yeah.
Met with Fred this morning.
Okay.
So we're off and running.
Good deal. I do have some information on the other easement stuff. I'll talk to you after the meeting.
Okay, good.
Did you see this, what Bob just handed me, which is Blowing Rock's proposed ordinance?
I don't know if I
Can you
see-
get a,
That was in the email?
no, this is, I just got this from Bob. So I guess, well, I'll try to get this out to everybody.
Well, I don't know if that's what if you wanted this.
Well, I just want to take a look at it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll be useful just
You want to make a
to
copy of it?
take a look. We don't need it right now, but
You don't need it now, we just.
Okay.
yeah, just at the end, if you could just copy it and forward it to us all. Oh, we can take a look at it.
Okay, yeah.
Like Blowing Rock's got a proposed ordinance, so see what it is. All right, I guess we'll go ahead and start. Let me go ahead and call the Tuesday, April 27th, 2021 Planning Board meeting to order. We have a quorum here. We still may have one more representative come in shortly. First order of business is adoption of the agenda. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda? Anything that they want to add? No. All right, if I can get a motion to adopt the agenda as proposed. I move. Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Next item would be the adoption of the minutes from the last meeting. Has everybody had the opportunity to review those?
Yes.
Any changes or additions? No. All right, I need a motion to adopt the minutes as written. So moved. Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No opposed. All right, do we have any old business, Preston?
No, I didn't put anything on there. I can update you real quickly on the 160D
160, okay.
revisions. Those are still moving along. I hope to get you pretty much the bulk of the chapters in the next week or two, and then there may be some follow-up. I went through the rest of the chapters, and there are several that don't need any modification, and then there's a couple that need a little more work, like the subdivision ordinance, but the rest of them are still minor. It's still nothing that is supposed to change the effect of the ordinance or anything. It's really just making sure those references are correct and all that. So I'll get you those. The plan is to have that on the May agenda for May for you guys, and then have that for council in June.
That's what I was just going to
And
ask,
that
because
will-
they need to approve it by June.
Yeah, June is July 1st is our deadline, so we're on target for that anyway.
And if there's changes after that, they can always.
Yeah, and it's not like, I mean, the changes are in effect now. They just gave local governments till July to sort of make their corrections in their own ordinances. But yeah, we should be our target.
Okay, May agenda for us, and then June for council.
Yeah.
All right. Now, new business, the council has asked us to study the issue of short-term rental regulation. And I did some research, and I've sent you some stuff that all of you now have. And then Bob just gave us, Blowing Rock apparently has created a proposed ordinance. I also sent you some information from Boone 2019. Boone apparently had some issues with their own regulations. But Preston, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand our zoning regulation, our council specifically allows short-term rentals in pretty much all of Beech Mountain under our zoning regulations. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so that's not an approach that we can take, and it's probably not an approach that's workable for us anyway, is to try to segregate those into specific parts of the town under zoning.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about it, but the first problem that I noticed was we don't even have a list of short-term rentals. And let me give you a little bit of information. What I found out is most of our short-term rental occupancy tax income comes from Airbnb and from VRBO. Those companies take the position that their rentals are, that the list of their rentals are proprietary, and they do not share that with the town. They simply remit to the town a single check representing all of the occupancy tax for a particular month. So the town has its own list, but Bob just told me that the legal opinion is that can't be shared and can't be used for anything other than occupancy tax purposes. There is a rental affidavit of compliance under our code of ordinances. Anyone who rents a unit is required to send to the fire department a certification that they have fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, and carbon monoxide detectors. But Bob has just told me there's not a lot of compliance with that either, and that database is fairly small. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I believe it's less than 50% compliance annually.
So it seems the first thing we're going to need to figure out, even in deciding how to do this, is we're going to need to create a database or figure out how to create a database of some sort, because the town's going to need it for, if they change the garbage bin requirement to require short-term rentals to have a bear-resistant bin. Right now, we don't even know who is going to have to comply with that. So it seems to me before we even talk about regulation, we need to talk about how we're even going to identify who gets regulated. It looks like Blowing Rock's idea and what Rebecca suggested was creating a town ordinance requirement that if you do a short-term rental, you are required to register with the town. and there could be a nominal registration fee, but the idea would be to at least develop a database so we know who is involved in short-term rentals. And that may be one of the first things we need to think about. If anybody has any other ideas on how to develop a short-term rental database, Rebecca told me a number of years ago, she sent out a letter to every resident of the town saying, if you're renting your house, you need to pay your occupancy tax. And she said she got some people came in, but a lot of people apparently aren't doing it either. So any ideas on how to develop that database out of, we have about 2,100 dwelling units here. The number I've heard is we have 700 or so who are in the short-term rental market. I don't even know where that number comes from. Kate from TDA gave me that number, but I don't know how she developed that number. So that may be something to ask about as well.
Unless it's just based on occupancy tax that she's gotten. There could be lots more.
Right. I mean, there's, again, they get the bulk, apparently the bulk of the occupancy tax comes from a single check from Airbnb and a single check from VRBO.
Right.
She says her database contains about 100 and some that are individual renters or are renting through one of the real estate agencies. And they provide her that data. So we have some of those, but again, according to Bob, we can't use it for any other purpose other than occupancy tax. So we're going to have to develop our own system of getting those in. And the only way, it seems to me, the only way to ensure compliance is to require registration and then go from there. Any other ideas? I mean, think about it. We're not going to figure this out today, so. Well, if we get beyond that problem, then we have the issues of what do we want to do, what do we want to think about recommending to council on regulating or doing anything with short-term rentals. I mean, I know I get a lot of feedback from residents that there's a lot of concern about the impact of short-term rentals on the livability, on traffic, on infrastructure, on services. So I think what we ought to do is break it out into categories and then figure out what is legal, first of all, what is theoretically possible, what are we trying to address, and then how do we best address it in a proposal to council. Who wants to start?
I guess the first question is the legality. Before we can start making rules and trying to put regulations in, we've got to figure out whether it's legal to retroactively go back and say this area cannot have short-term rentals when people have bought properties for that purpose.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way we're going to be able to limit. I mean, I don't think that's the way to go, quite frankly, because I don't think there's any way now to limit
Right.
short-term rentals to any. I mean, I think we are stuck with where they are,
Right.
which is all over the mountain. The question is, how do we address the issues that residents are complaining about, which to me seem to be the number of people who are in some of these places, the parking issues, the noise issues, the trash issues, and probably the light issues. Those seem to be the spectrum of the problems that we may be able to address.
Is it possible to create a list where each home is rated for occupancy?
Isn't that on that email? I'm trying to pull up that email that you had sent that had it was like a one page of like our town rules. You know what I'm talking
Yes,
about?
I mean, that was sort of an
Right.
idea, and that a couple of us talked about it and came up with an idea, which is more guidelines and rules. And then basically that one was more, here are what Beach Mountain already has in place. because you're a renter here, you need to understand what the rules are, not creating any new rules. Let's talk about occupancy limits. Preston, if you have a 3-bedroom house right now, and you are simply a homeowner, there are no limits to how many people you can invite, not rental, but just invite into that house, correct?
Well, you're probably getting into legal issues with that question, but it is if it's in a single family zoning district,
Right.
there is a legal definition of a family, and so you're limited to like 5 unrelated people. But if they're all related, there's no limit to the number of people that could be. Now, I don't know if there's a fire issue or anything like that, but in terms of zoning, as long as they're related, it doesn't affect, how many bedrooms or anything like that.
I guess one of the things to look at, and I think some other communities have looked at it, is limiting rentals, the number of occupancy, to either somehow relating it to the number of bedrooms or relating it to the number of beds. And let me focus on something a little bit different. About half of our residents are on septic systems. Do you get involved in permitting of septic systems? I mean, it's more Fish's job, I know, but
Yeah, well, it's really the health department who actually permits the septic system. County health department does
and that's
that.
related to the number of bathrooms,
That was bedrooms.
bedrooms?
Bedrooms.
So if you have a 3-bedroom house and you shove 3 sets of bunk beds in one room,
Right,
then technically you're over that limit just based on the septic
and you're
issue.
probably gonna overrun the septic system.
Mhm.
I guess one of the issues to look at is, is one of the ways to do this to put an occupancy limit on a house based either on bedrooms
Right.
or bathrooms or square footage? I guess there's another number of other alternatives.
I think if you limit it to like 2 people per room, and I read something about that now, of course I can't find where it was, but it was like 2 people per room, and then it said anywhere from 2 to 4 extra, like if you have people sleeping in your den or whatever.
Right.
Right.
I mean, that would greatly reduce things, and you're only looking at 10 people versus 15 to 16 that these people are putting in their houses. And we had that issue was it last week? With a house on Greenbrier. On one of those Beach Mountain pages, people were talking about there was a house with like 40 kids in it. Not kids, but
40?
like 38 to 40 people. They were saying that they were on the roof and on the decks, and they were
Yeah.
concerned about the decks falling in. But again, these people, they're taking to Facebook to say something when they should just be calling in.
Bob or calling Preston or calling somebody. Well, I think that's one worth looking at, so we'll
I
talk
think
about
that seems like one of the easier ones
to
to
fix.
recognize.
Right.
Because if you see 20 cars out front of a house
Yeah,
that's designed for 10 occupancy, then you probably got a problem.
Well, the other way to do it maybe is to, you have to look at all the listings, is to see how many, when you look at these Airbnb and VRBO listings, is to see how many people they're claiming they're allowing into these units.
Right.
And then compare it to the number of bedrooms or baths or something.
that's just gonna take research.
No, I know, I'm not sure I want to do that, but it's just it's another option. Let's talk a little bit about parking. Preston, parking, there's currently a parking ordinance, correct?
Yes.
And enlighten me again, what is it?
It's based on the number of bedrooms. Basically, up to 3 bedrooms, you need 2 off-street parking spaces, and then an additional space, I believe, for each additional bedroom over 3.
Will you say that one more time?
Up to 3 bedrooms is 2 off-street parking, and then additional, I think it's 1 for 1 on the additional bedroom per space.
Do you know how we check that? Do we check that when we issue a CO, or how do we?
We check it when we issue the building permit, typically. They have to show where they're gonna have the parking area, the driveway and all that, the number of spaces. And then we look at the number of bedrooms.
And on-street parking is not permitted on most roads on Beach Mountain, correct?
I believe that's the first statement, yes. Oh, it's not, it's not considered in the permitting.
No, no, I understand it's not
Yeah.
considered. Isn't there an ordinance that says no
Yeah,
off,
there's no on-street parking on any town road.
on any town road at all? And that's enforced through the police department when they
Correct.
drive through. What do they normally do if they see somebody parked on the street?
Well, the policy is that they try to identify who the owner of the vehicle is, and if that can be done, they have a number of means of doing that. They even turn on the blue lights and blow the siren a few times to see if we can get somebody to
To
come
come
out.
out?
If the vehicle is moved, problem solved. In the cases where we cannot solve the issue, they're either ticketed or towed.
And if people were to call the police would respond and take care of that.
We do, they call often, usually I'd like to say that it was mostly during patrol, but it's usually in response to a complaint.
So it seems to me that one is already, we have a pretty good ordinance then. It's just a question of, one, making sure that renters are aware of it, and two, doing some kind of enforcement mechanism. Because I know one of the things that people have told me about is they're concerned about on-street parking, because they're seeing a lot of on-street parking at some of these houses. So that one seems to be one that we can simply do by enforcing them in some fashion. I guess light would be next, and what did Fish talk about the other, he said he talked about the dark skies?
Yeah, just trying to see that enforced, I guess.
Texas,
I don't know if, like, reaching out to maybe residents that don't know that that's something that's enforceable, or, like, I've had to go knock on the neighbor's door, like, at 11:30 at night on a Wednesday. I know you're on vacation, but my children have school tomorrow, and there's a noise ordinance. But I don't know if people even know that, to make something like this, like, more widely known to everybody.
Right.
Because it's gonna take everybody to enforce it.
Well, it seems we have a good light ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems, again, that seems to be another matter of education more than anything directed specifically at short-term rentals, because I don't know that we want to or can create some higher standard for them. I think we have a good ordinance in place, and it's a question of enforcement, and that's a tough one to enforce. I don't know. Have you ever heard of anybody trying to enforce the light ordinance, Bob?
Yes, didn't go well.
I've heard of people going to their neighbor's house and taking out their floodlights.
Like with a gun?
Like,
Just unscrewing it?
walked up there, took the light bulb out.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
and they have been reportedly shot out.
Oh, I don't know about that, but
So that's an educational thing, it seems.
Yeah.
Noise ordinance, again, that seems to be the same thing. We have a good town noise ordinance. It's
Yeah.
pretty specific. And it seems to me that that's another one that's a matter of it's not a matter of more regulation, it's a matter of how do we get people to understand what the ordinance requires and what they're supposed to be doing. And again, I know police get calls on that.
Correct,
And they will respond, and
correct.
I assume people initially will get a warning, and then multiple complaints, something else will happen?
Yeah, usually it's handled, on the initial response. I think what we're finding is that the complainant doesn't feel that the ordinance is sufficient. respond and they'll say, yeah, there's a party going on next door. It's 9 o'clock. The ordinance doesn't allow us to do anything. And that's not acceptable to the
resident.
person complaining.
And the ordinance is 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock,
Yeah, between 10 and what, 6 or so?
6.
6.
Do people who are renting out their homes, are they required to have contracts with these rules spelled out?
Not currently.
To me, that seems like a good way to address it with both the homeowner
I agree.
and the renters, and then when the police show up, they have something that you signed a contract saying you understood, and then they've got that backing behind them instead of, that's the first time these people have heard of the problem, the ordinance.
Who would get, who's the enforcement action against? Let's say you've got a renter and the police, is it a citable ordinance? I mean, do they ticket somebody for that?
A noise?
Yeah,
Yes, that's not citable to the homeowner, it's citable to the person making the noise.
but how do we enforce it? I mean, you issue them a citation.
If they don't comply and a citation is issued,
Right.
it's enforced just like any other citation against them. It's a municipal citation,
Right.
and they're difficult to follow up.
If they're not North Carolina residents, there's,
They just disappear.
yeah, okay. That's what I was afraid of. So it seems we've got, again, it's a matter of education, I think, on noise.
Yeah. Can you not hold the property owners accountable for their renters?
My understanding, we cannot.
That's a shame.
Well, it'd be like, if I borrowed your car and got a speeding ticket,
Right,
it's not your vehicle, you were not in control.
true. I guess you're right. Yeah.
That's how it was explained to me.
Okay, well, that's something to figure out. Is there, I mean, we can talk about or research, is there a way, not necessarily through a citation, but some other way to hold a property owner responsible for the actions of the renter, and that's something I think it's worth exploring. And again, it may not be legal, it may be some other, I mean, worst case, you can probably take action under nuisance ordinances, but that would take an awful lot of, I mean, I know cities are trying to do that sometimes against these hotels that rent where they have a lot of drug problems. They're trying to use nuisance ordinances to try to shut them down. I think that would be pretty hard to do here, but something worth exploring. Garbage, I think garbage, the council is already taking, or it looks like they're going to take action on garbage by requiring bear-resistant containers for all rental units. But as we've discussed already, identifying who those people are and who's going to have those is kind of an interesting question. I don't know there's much more we can do. I don't know what council is doing already on garbage. One of the other ones I thought about looking back at the list is the pet ordinance. Again, I think it's a matter of education because I think the town already has an ordinance in place.
And that ordinance is just within verbal command, correct? Not exactly a leash law?
It is not a leash law, it's under control,
Okay.
is the word, the operative term is that the animal has to be under control of the owner.
Yeah, council had a lot of debate on whether they wanted a leash law or not. And decided to do it as on a control basis.
I think the only thing that I've heard people mention is that even if you're walking next to your dog and your dog is in someone else's yard,
He's
you
not
can
under
still see it, you can control them, but then they're,
trespassing.
yeah,
Yeah, on the trails, I've had owners' pets attacking my dog,
right.
because their dog was off leash. And they feel like if they're on a trail, they can just let their animal go.
Yeah. I mean, I know, last summer, I had friends who took their dogs out on leash, and then 3 units down, the dogs were not on leash and attacked both dogs, the husband and the child. Like hospital attack.
Yeah, I think that's it's interesting, that's one where I haven't had a lot of complaints from people about renters, it's more others, so, I don't know, I think it's an educational thing. Fireworks are another one, not this time of year, but there are other times of year where fireworks are not permitted at any time in Beach Mountain. Am I correct in that, Bob?
Well, no private use, commercial is permitted with a permit.
Sure, but there's no.
Private use is not permitted, that's state law.
Again, it's another one of those that's hard to enforce. I know police get called on those. I have called them myself because somebody was shooting them onto my house. Well, the problem is, they're up here, and they're shooting them this way, and they come down on your house. But I think that's another educational thing, and people on vacation tend to want to shoot off fireworks. Any other issues that you've heard about that either apply to renters or you get problems of rent? Oh, the ATV issue. ATVs. Again, I think we have a good ordinance there, and I think it's more a question of education again. I know the club has had an issue with trespassing, but again, I think that's an educational matter. People have to understand that club property is private property, and I know the club calls the police, and they'll respond when they can. The biggest problem we're having right now there's a rental house on the right side of number 1 Green, which is sort of at the end of a little dead-end road. It gets rented all the time, and we're having huge problems with that, but that's an issue I think just needs to be dealt with by police and by the club. Any other particular areas that we want to address, and then I guess we'll figure out how to best go at this.
Has there been any discussion about, with all the new developments that's going on the Mountain Creek, when areas are getting cleared or approved for development, has there been any discussion about having those areas as non-short-term rental zones?
Like capping it now?
I mean, I know you can't go back and rezone
Right.
something.
Right.
The problem is that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Preston, but most of the zoning areas are fairly large. In other words, the residential and the properties that are being developed are within that zoning area. So I don't think you can change and say for something in the future, we're not going to allow it even though it's in an R1 zoning district, isn't that?
Yeah, the zones are fairly large, and you can't sort of, and a lot of the development is going in between, kind of filling in the open spaces, so you can't like pick a couple of lots and say you can't do it on this. There's some taking laws and that sort of thing. You're sort of, if a person owns a property, they have some certain rights. So you can't individually zone a single or even a couple of lots. You have to do larger areas, or they're calling it spot zoning, and you have to. It can be legally challenged a lot. So
Yeah, I was thinking more large tracts of land that you see throughout the area.
yeah,
But we have a subdivision ordinance, correct?
there is a subdivision ordinance. It doesn't address short-term rentals. It addresses lot size and that sort of thing.
Are there any parts of the town still that have tracts that are large enough that would be potentially applicable, that the subdivision ordinance would potentially be applicable to?
There's a few.
More down towards Buckingham?
Yeah, there's one that is on the backside of I think it's St. Andrews maybe, or Pine Ridge. There's a big open area down there that Cherry Gap developer talked to the previous planning board.
Is that within the town?
It is. Well, their Cherry Gap subdivision is not, but there
That's
was a
what I
piece
thought.
that came back into, down below Pine Ridge, I think it's Pine Ridge, that's undeveloped. And then there's another undeveloped piece that is on the other side of Pine Ridge, I believe it is, that was like a tall trees development. They had it platted at one time, but the plat never got recorded. So that one had like 75 lots or something in it.
Yeah, 74.
Yeah, so there's a couple of areas that could be subdivided with more than, a couple of lots, but,
I mean, that may be an area at least to look at, although again, I don't know if those are ever gonna be developed. I mean, there's a developer right now developing, supposedly building some houses below number 12 Green, but that's outside of the town limits. And so we wouldn't have any, but I mean, it connects right into St. Andrews. But I don't think we have any power over, and I suspect there's gonna be some rental units there, the way, what he was talking, but there's not gonna be a lot of, he's talking about building 1 or 2 a year, so I don't think that's gonna be a huge. I mean, it's no different than the problem we're gonna have, I think, with Eagle's Nest coming in through Beach Mountain Parkway. Those 20 or 30 little 2-bedroom houses. Have y'all been out there?
Not recently.
I mean, if you go out Beach Mountain, the gravel part of Beach Mountain Parkway, keep going past the rock quarry, there's a gate that they've already put in, and go around, and there's between 20 and 30 little 2-bedroom, 2-bath units that Eagle's Nest has already built, and most of those, I understand, are being rented. No, they're not even, they're Avery County, they're not the town of Beach Mountain, but they're gonna be affecting us, but there's not a lot we're gonna be able to do about them. So you wanna explore doing something with, if there's a way to do something with
If
the
there's a way-
subdivision ordinance?
I guess my concern, and it may be outside of the purview of what we're trying to tackle here, is as a town continues to grow, it just seems that homes that are available for people who want to live on the mountain and work on the mountain are becoming less and less. And I would hate for the future of the community to be such that if you're gonna work on Beach Mountain, you gotta live off of Beach Mountain. And
I mean, we already,
that seems like the
face that.
direction it's going in very quickly, because it's really hard to find a place now that's not, being used as a second home or a rental property.
the question though is, how do you legally fix that?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, think about it some more, but
I mean, if you can't if you can't build on the property for rental purposes,
Right.
it limits the pool of people wanting to buy that property. And it may make it more available to people who want to live year-round. So that's my thinking on it. But yeah, I don't know how legally you can do it, but that's a concern I have as we look down the road.
I mean, I don't know what given the way our zoning map is already set out, I think it's very hard, even if it were possible, and I'm not even sure it's totally legal, is to say no short-term rentals in certain zoning districts, but we're way beyond that, and it's just very difficult to try to put that back together.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
I
Isn't
mean,
that how Asheville's is? When I was reading through that paperwork, in Asheville's zones, like a cap on percentage of homes in each zone?
Yes, I believe they do have in certain zones, they have a cap on the number of permits that they'll issue for short-term rentals. Or they call them whole house rentals or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you have to occupy at least 1 bedroom.
Yeah, theirs is, the owner has to be on the property to rent out a part of their house or something, so
Mhm.
it's a,
but in order to do that, well, first thing, obviously, we need a
A database.
database to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know, has that been challenged? Has it been upheld?
I think pretty much all of them have been challenged.
But has it been upheld so far?
I don't,
Look at that. I
I
actually
don't
like
know
that
that it's
idea.
been struck down. I know Wilmington's had just got, struck down recently, and, there have been challenges, basically in the Wilmington decision, that, you know, the school government said, we don't know what's legal to regulate. And that's part of the problem is the
Right.
state, you know, has not told us what we can and can't regulate on short-term rentals, really.
I mean, it seems to me that if it's a safety issue, which I do think occupancy would be safety, I do think parking would be safety, and those are the only two that we're really talking about, perhaps creating a different standard for short-term rentals than we are for residents. Everything else pretty much that we've talked about applies equally to residents as it does to short-term rentals, and so I don't know that you could have standing to challenge it as a short-term landlord, that we're somehow singling them out. All we're doing is we're enforcing the regulations that the town already has.
Right.
Now, the percentage cap I actually kind of like. I'm going to look into that a little bit more. I mean, that may be a way to at least, because once you get, talking to some friends who live in Florida beach communities, I mean, they say once you get to a tipping point on rentals, basically people who live there full time try to move out. They just don't, they simply don't want to live there anymore because the problem with the short-term rentals is so great. And then all you've got is rentals.
Right.
And I don't think we want to go there, so.
And I think that we're seeing, people who live here, who have lived here full time and who have resided within the town are receiving notice from the people that they rent from, the owners of the properties, that the market's so great that they're gonna sell their property. And so I know several people who have been employed up here for years, who now don't have a place to live or they're actively looking, and people are charging such an exorbitant amount for monthly rent that it's not even feasible. So we're running into that. I mean, there's a lot of people who've had to move off the mountain recently, who still are working
Yeah.
and now have to commute.
Well, especially the way prices have gone. The way house prices have gone.
Yeah,
up,
so,
too.
yeah, I mean, like, places that could charge a decent amount of rent are now selling for so much, like the places at the Pinnacle, or the places at Holiday Beach that 2 years ago were nominal. Or now,
You can do one.
now they're, it's crazy, and
It
then
is.
people just don't have places to live.
First, would it be possible for the board to consider also looking at the impact to town services? You mentioned it in the
Yes.
beginning about the septic tank. I'm not sure if 50% of our units are on septic. I think it's much lower than that. But more importantly to me is a single-family home was computed to be X amount of water and sewage. And those structures are now consuming far greater amounts than what was anticipated based on their zoning. And I don't know what can be done, but that impact to our utility is getting greater and greater as you take a single-family home and you occupy it on a regular basis with larger than normal occupancy. That you pay for the additional water use,
Right.
but our capacity is not, doesn't take that into consideration. And when those homes were built and those capacity charges were paid, it was based upon a traditional single-family home as opposed to a business.
Right.
And if the planning board would at least put that on their list and take a look at that.
Well, I think I think that falls into really the occupancy issue. And I think what we need to figure out or think about is how do we deal with the occupancy on these houses, especially the over-occupancy.
Well, I agree. We have a number of homes that were purchased and renovated just for short-term rental. And they went from a traditional 3-bedroom home, which was anticipated with 2 bathrooms, anticipated to be maybe a 5 or 6 unit
Right.
family. And now they're renting out every week with 28 people. And the quantity of water and sewer that is impacted is affecting our future infrastructure
But-
plans.
But they did not add more bedrooms, they're simply piling people in.
No, they do renovation, they add bedrooms.
And we do permit that.
In a lot of cases, we did. In some cases, we don't, and we find out about it and go back. I know of a few. But in many cases, it was permitted to increase the bedroom and turn it into a business. The building and fire code takes a different approach on a residential structure. It's deemed to be residential and it's not considered a business. And your zoning looks at, residential use. But in fact, these are buildings that are now being used as what we consider in the building, an R1, a residential one, which is a business, much like a small hotel, bed and breakfast, things like that. And part of the issue I have is that we're putting a business into a residential zoning district. We're calling it residential, and that there lies the rub. But in fact, it's a business. It's a small hotel, is
Yeah.
what it is, in a residential zoning district. I don't have an answer, but I'd like maybe the board to take a look at that. It's a dilemma that we're seeing statewide.
So as far as that you're concerned, when you inspect one of these under the fire code, you're inspecting them as a commercial, as a commercial entity?
Well, that's the only way I can inspect it. The single family is exempt from fire code and inspections. So when I get called in to inspect one of these properties, I have to go under an R1.
And that's the rental code of compliance, that's what you're looking for.
Well, no, those are for, because the code doesn't allow an inspection of a single-family home.
Right.
The town came up with the ordinance with the affidavit. That's for a single-family home that's being used as a rental.
Right.
And so in other words, if I knew that there was a single-family rental and they sent in an affidavit last year and not this year, I really can't go knock on the door and do an inspection. I could ask them to provide an affidavit, but I don't have the code authority to go inside and make an inspection on a single-family.
But what you're inspecting for, the fact that they have to have a fire extinguisher, smoke detector on each living level, carbon monoxide detector, landline, that is fire code or that is town ordinance?
Town ordinance.
Town ordinance through the fire code?
Correct.
Okay. But is the basis for that quasi-commercial?
Yes.
Okay. So you pull that basically out of what is required for a commercial entity?
That is correct.
Okay. And is that the extent of it? Are there more things that?
We have some short-term rentals that have occupancies of 28 to 30 people, and we require them to have egress. We go in and require, in many cases, exiting. The question is whether a fire alarm is required. Under a traditional R1, a fire alarm could be required. And we just don't have that authority currently through the state to mandate that. But from a definition standpoint, regardless of what the structure looks like, if it's rented on a continuous basis to short-term, it's more like a motel.
But I mean, it's almost like your position is then they're not even in compliance with zoning because they're in violation of the zoning for that particular area.
That's my opinion. I think we have a few that I can point to that are in single-family zoning that no owner ever lives there, and they're rented on a continuous basis. They're no different than a small hotel.
Well, maybe something unclear. I thought I was reading, when I was reading through all that stuff, that a short-term rental was anything that was rented less than 90 days.
But Bob's saying that's 90 days, one lease.
Okay, that clears that up, sorry.
Yeah, as opposed to, he's saying that this is renting, you know, a week at a time.
Right,
They're
right.
renting to 50 different people during the year, each one a week. And
Yes.
that's still considered short-term.
So as long as the lease is no longer than 90 days at one given time.
Correct.
Okay, that clears that
And
up.
that's,
In my opinion, it's no different than the Best Western down in Banner Rock, just
Right.
smaller.
It is. Or any of the B&Bs that are in Banner Elk.
And they would not be permitted in the current zoning that we have.
Gotcha.
do you know anyone who's tried to take that position and push forward with it? Because I think it's an interesting argument. I see all sorts of litigation involved in that.
Yeah, if we had the answer. I'm not aware of that. I've argued that here as a fire chief with previous managers, and we pursued that. It didn't get traction at the elected officials
Right.
position. But quite frankly, by definition, I consider those, the very large, this isn't, I have a 3-bedroom home that I rent out to a couple or a family. These are what I call the large short-term rentals, so the 25 and 30 people. Those are the ones that are really causing the problem. It's not that you take your house and rent it during ski season to a family of 6 that comes up and rents your house. That's not really where the problem is. It's these large units that are impacting the neighborhood with 30 people.
Are they larger houses or are they not? I mean, are they 4 and 5 bedroom, 6-bedroom houses, or how are they?
Well, some are large in square footage. Others have rearranged the interior to be sleeping areas wherever you can be.
How would we go about identifying them? I mean, I think it's an intriguing argument, but in order to really move it down the road, you'd almost have to be able to identify and set a cutoff and saying anybody who rents is putting over 25 people in them, say.
You have to
Well, we
limit my bedroom.
did a search of the internet actually, and you know, it's not that big a town. We kind of have an idea where they are. So you search the internet, and then they're advertising, you know, short-term rentals of 40 people, or in this case, I'm talking about 32. And they have interior pictures, and they show you where they sleep. And we had one where they were sleeping people in the attic, which doesn't meet any life safety code. But we haven't found a good mechanism to one, identify and then enforce.
Is it? A while back, the town, sent out the house numbers
Right.
that they required everyone to put on, and that, to my understanding, was pretty successful. Can we do something similar to that where you have a different color around, red or white metallic sticker? So if you are non-short-term rental, you have this sticker that you put on your mailbox to help fire and rescue and all that. And everybody has to register their home. And if you put something else like a red for rental, then you've got a list of, at least a layout of where your rental properties are. Yeah, or you can even do different color codes with rental under 10 people, over 10 people. And then if you see somebody who's listed as a 10-person occupancy has 8 cars in front of their house, there's a flag that goes off with police officers doing the rounds, and then you can look into that situation. I'm just trying to think of ways to get a registry
identify them.
and identify.
I mean, I think the thing is if the town takes the position, or if we try to create a recommendation that says we're going to have one set of rules for what we really consider short-term rentals, and we're going to look at commercial short-term rentals differently based on the number of occupants. I think we can certainly craft something like that, and if council is interested in passing something like that, the problem then is going to be where do we go from there, because I assume that would be challenged. Because basically what we're saying is they are not in compliance with the zoning area that they're in.
And also not in a septic thing.
Right.
I mean, I've seen large houses, 7,000 square feet, but literally only have 4 bedrooms. But then they've got, like I said, 3 sets of bunk beds or something. And if If the septic thing is 2 people per bedroom, then you still would only sleep 8 people if you had 4 bedrooms, even if your house was 10,000 square feet. And so if they have to comply with that, and again, it's just all about identifying them and creating a database.
Well, it's also, I think it's also a safety issue as far as, if you know they're out of compliance, then you hold some responsibility if there's an accident or a problem
Or
there.
fire.
So if you know they're out of compliance and you fine them or you've done whatever the town does, deems necessary, that's hopefully will help absolve the town of any responsibility, because they've addressed the issue with the property owner instead of knowing it's going on and not doing anything about it, and then all of a sudden there's an issue there.
If you take the position right now that somebody is not in compliance with the zoning that's applicable in their particular area, you send them a notice right now, correct?
Yes.
I mean, there is already a mechanism in place
Uh-huh.
to at least move this issue forward. In a hypothetical case, the town could say, we take the position that if you are renting to 40 people in a residential area, you are not in compliance with zoning, and you could right now issue them a notice of violation.
Yes.
And explain to us the steps that would go through.
We would, if it's a zoning violation, the zoning ordinance spells out certain steps. So the first step would be a notice of violation. You have them, typically give them 30 days to correct the issue. And then they have, within that 30 days, they can appeal to the Board of Adjustment. Board of Adjustment meets, and they could either uphold the administrative determination or overturn it. If it's upheld, we can issue fines. Typically, the standard fine for zoning is $100 per day continuing violation. So we would have to be able to prove that they're continuing to violate the ordinance, and then demonstrate that. That is typically collected through the attorney's office. There is a possibility, if we can't collect it, to issue liens, but that's the extent of it.
And their challenge after the Board of Adjustment is they can go to Superior Court.
They
correct?
can appeal to Superior Court
And
after
that's how it would get into the court
Yep.
system.
Yep.
But that's really a policy decision right now. I mean, your idea is really, could already be done if the town as a policy matter chose to try to go that route.
Well, it's a definition issue. Currently, to be in violation of the zoning code, you have to be in violation of something that's in the code that says you can't have that use in that particular zoning
Well,
code.
wouldn't running a commercial lodging establishment in a residential district be in violation?
Well, personally, and as the fire chief, I agree.
Okay.
The town does not, we don't have a mechanism to say that that is a commercial business. As it stands now, the building official, under the building code, sets the occupancy use. That person determines what a occupancy use is. And in the past, we have not been able to get over that hurdle that it has been defined as a business. I think our zoning code needs to have more detail into it to assist that code official, saying that yes, this in fact is a business, an R1 business, as opposed to a residential.
Okay, so you are not comfortable with the current definitions in order to take what we just talked about. In other words, right now, you don't feel we have enough authority to issue a notice of violation,
Correct.
even though it's, in your mind, it's clearly a commercial enterprise.
Correct.
Okay, all right, so we need to look at that then.
I mean, I've convinced myself of this, but it doesn't go much further than that.
But I mean, there's a way to, what you're saying is essentially we need to look at redefining what a commercial lodging establishment is, so that we can give guidance or potentially give guidance to the zoning officials to say this one's in compliance and this one's not.
Correct.
And then if they're not, then you can take the other steps.
Exactly. It looks like a duck.
Right.
It's a single-family home, but it's being used. It would be no different in my argument in the past, people. And then it would be no difference if I took my single-family home and I did vehicle repair in my driveway for hire. And so I had 3 or 4 vehicles under repair all the time in my yard, and they belonged to other people, and I was charging them to do it. That would be a violation of the zoning code. And it may be a little bit more obvious than what we're talking about. We have not been able to cross that threshold where single-family use being used for residential purposes is moved from single-family residential zoning over to a commercial zone.
But for example, in the car repair example, you're comfortable that our ordinance is sufficiently strong enough that you would be able to take steps in that case,
I believe so.
but just not in the,
Well, it would be more obvious, I would think. And
okay.
I don't know. It's, I've run into that stumbling block, that challenge in the past.
Okay. On the impact on town services, one of the other things that I have been thinking about, because I've had a lot of complaints also, and Bob raised the issue of the occupancy tax dollars do not go to the town. In some towns in North Carolina, some of the occupancy tax dollars do go to the town. And that is it requires a legislative fix. But there is clearly an increased use and burden on infrastructure. The only place the town is recovering dollars for that is on water and sewer. They're not really recovering. The TDA gets the rest of the money. Now the TDA can share some of that with the town and can fund certain town things, but none of those dollars go to the town. So one of the other things that might be worth thinking about is how do we get short-term rentals to contribute to town infrastructure in a more direct fashion? I don't have an answer, but it's just another question. Again, there are some communities, and they were authorized by legislation. There's some beach communities that they're allowed to use occupancy tax dollars to add sand to their beaches. There are some that are allowed to use it to pay for police protection, fire protection, water and sewer, all of those kinds of things. Given the impact that these short-term rentals are having on town infrastructure, one of the things we might want to consider is how do we try to recover some of that? And I don't think there's a way we can do it probably short of legislation, but it's just something else to think about.
Could you do it in the form of a grant? Like the grants the TDA just
They are,
did? I don't know, to fund extra.
they're limited. When you look at that statute, they're so constrained in what they can spend their money for. Most of it has to be spent on bringing more people here. Which is, oddly enough, they're bringing lots of people in, we're getting lots of money, and they're supposed to spend most of that money
To bring
to
more.
bring more in.
Well, and to bring more people, we would need, for example, like, so I'm from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and Isle of Palms grew a lot after Hurricane Hugo. People were building huge houses to occupy more people, so that their house, of course, would make more money for them on a short-term rental. And then they have one plot of land probably left on the entire island, and they wanted to build a hotel. But their sewer system wouldn't suffice to build a unit that held 100 more rooms. Like, the system just won't take that. And so we're gonna get to that same kind of point where our police can't control what's going on. The water supply isn't going to, like, so all that occupancy tax that comes in, we'd think that there was a way to utilize that to provide more security for the town or to.
Well, I agree, but the problem is the legislature's gonna have to give us the authority.
Okay.
I don't think we can do it certainly not under the current TDA, or if each town, the legislature grants each town the specific authority to levy an occupancy tax. And in that legislation, it tells the town the general areas on how it's supposed to spend the money, or it tells the TDA on how it's supposed to spend the money. So the town on its own, or the TDA on its own, can't deviate from the categories. And unfortunately, the categories are such that most of the money is supposed to be spent on advertising and tourism-related issues. And so the TDA can't simply give the town $500,000 and say, go spend it on the water plant.
Gotcha.
The
Unfortunately.
money that Airbnb and Verbo sends to the town, how's that used?
That goes into, that's the occupancy tax money.
So
That goes to the TDA.
That's where it's all.
Yeah.
So they're getting definitely the money from those online features
Yes.
in the platforms, and then also like from local, but like people who just handle it themselves, you have no idea. Is that what we're?
No, actually, again, the people who handle it themselves, well, there's probably still some out there,
Okay.
but the town has, they told me they have a list of about 105 that handle it themselves,
Okay.
that pay the occupancy tax themselves. Now, some of those are also handled by some of the realtors, because some of the realtors still handle short-term rentals. And the town has that list. But by and large, now, most of them are handled through these rental online.
Okay.
And what they do is they know what the occupancy tax of the town is. They handle all the financial transactions, so they simply deduct the 6%, and then every month, they send the town a check.
Okay.
But they will not give the town a list of where that money came from.
Okay.
They simply say, here they are, we've done the math, you have to trust us, and go from there. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Fair way to put it. Now, the town at one point did hire a company which scoured online listings and came up with a lot of these people. But I understand we no longer have that contract, is that right?
No, it doesn't mean that we won't continue it. It's not efficient to do it every year.
Oh, okay.
So we did it for a period of 2 years. We got that, and it was beneficial. And we'll probably do it again. The TDA usually funds that. We'll probably do it again in another year or two. Because doing it every year, you just create the same database.
So what were they, were they finding the Airbnb and VRBOs as well, or they were not searching for those?
No.
They were strictly searching for people who are advertising on their own.
The individuals, and that's where we came up with that 107 plus list of individuals.
Okay.
It was called SDR Helper, was the name
Okay.
of the program.
Yeah, and I remember they were really successful initially.
Well, first year, we had no idea what was out there. They were very productive, and it was very productive in increasing the occupancy tax. It did, from the TDA's perspective, it didn't serve a purpose to just do it every year.
Yeah, right, okay. And apparently we have pretty good compliance from the local realtors as well. I mean, they give us who they're
We do.
with. Yeah. And there's probably some we're still missing. I mean, to answer your question, there's probably still some individuals that, if they don't advertise on the internet, we're probably not catching them. But I think everybody who's doing it is advertising on the internet, so.
Yeah. I think so too.
All right, any other category, anything else we need to consider? And what I'm going to try to do is, I'm going to try to put this together into a document for y'all to look at, and then we can sort of go category by category. But the sense I'm getting is that other than occupancy and parking and perhaps percentage caps, most of the things that people are concerned about, we already have a good town ordinance on. And it's more a question of how do we get compliance from the landlords and more importantly from the renters. And the other issue is how do we develop a real database so that we know who we're actually talking to. And other than registration, if anybody has a better idea, where they have to have an annual license. And it's more so we develop the database. It's not a fundraising mechanism. Although maybe that's where we could develop the fundraising mechanism. I don't know. That's something to consider as well. generate some of those infrastructure dollars.
Yeah, like if they had to come in January 15th of every year and just like you register your car,
Right.
something like that.
Exactly. And then the question is, do you want that simply to be a nominal registration fee, or are you going to use that to try to offset some of these additional costs that these short-term renters are, the impact they're having on infrastructure? I mean, there's sort of two approaches there.
I think that it couldn't be too exorbitant, or then they're gonna fight
Correct.
back.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's going to be the problem. Although, I think they just pass it on. They tend to pass on those costs.
Mhm.
And it's just a question of how you make that fair. Because it seems to me the ones that are larger, the ones that are generating more money, ought to be the ones that are going to be contributing more. There's got to be some equitable
Yeah.
way to contribute. Bob, anything else?
No, isn't that enough?
I think so, but, yeah. The town has given us, I think, 6 months, but I hope we can at least have a document that we can look at shortly, and then I'll try to get everything out to y'all, and then we can talk about it some more. But I do think we need to start with figuring out how do we get a list of people, and then how do we get most of this information out to them. And I think using the rules and regulations, guidelines is probably a good way to start, and just maybe adapt that for part of this problem.
Yep, maybe you require that, and again, it's enforcing it, but like that simple list that we have, you have to laminate it, stick it on the refrigerator or
Exactly.
something. I don't know. Or it has to be included in any advertisement for your house. Any listing.
Well, and as Sandy Carr, who's the TDA chairman, always keeps telling me, we have to make it friendly as well. We can't. She's
Well,
always
it's a
telling me,
business.
you can't. Well, she's always telling me you can't. You're trying to be friendly to these people. So we do whatever we do. We have to sort of put a positive spin on it.
But we
But
can't do something that we can't enforce or
Right.
follow up
Right.
on, because then they're just gonna ignore it in the future, so.
okay, anything else? I will try to put this together, and then I will look for input from y'all as we move forward. Anything else, Preston?
No, not for me. I'll send out some more information that I've found anyway. It may be semantics, but part of the Wilmington decision was you can't have a registration system. But it does talk about a zoning permit, which, again, may be semantics, so I'll send that to you.
Yeah, well,
Give that information while you
what
come.
about a licensing system?
Just to call it something else?
It may be that you have to
That's
consider it
kinda
as something else. It can't be a registration based on short-term rentals, but, well, I'll send it to
Okay,
you.
I'm curious, I'm
and,
gonna look at that. Yeah.
we'll-
What's our next meeting date?
Our next one will be May 25th.
May 25, 9 o'clock. Unless we hear differently, we'll do it here, same way we did it today. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
First, before you adjourn,
Yes.
just as an FYI, there's a vacancy on your board.
Yes.
We've advertised it, we have at least one, correct?
No,
We have three. So we'll have it on the May 11th agenda
Okay.
for the council to appoint a member.
Okay. Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn?